In this video, we're going to be taking a look at all the different zombie types in Dying Light the Beast. It turns out that the nasty zombie virus called THV has made its way over to the nice scenic mountainous region of Castor Woods to bugger up the locals' plans there. Unfortunately for them, most have turned into the usual mixed bag of freaks and abominations, and the ones that haven't been infected have now got to spend the rest of their miserable lives putting up with the ones that have, along with a bunch of other douchebags with guns. Though after spending 13 years getting poked in the eye and being strapped to purple sunbeds, at least Kyle Crane's finally back to kick some more zombie ass. He's on a bit of a revenge mission this time, and he's going to be up against a lot of different types of infected along the way. So what do zombies generally like to do? Well, they like to go around biting things. The most common type of infected you'll see stumbling around the place, looking like they've just come back from a rave at 6 in the morning, is the typical teeth-chattering biter. These guys have been well and truly shafted by the virus, which has been coursing through their veins for quite a while now, causing their bodies to slowly decay, give them the munchies for uninfected human flesh, and basically turn their minds into mashed potato. It's made them very aggressive, but it's also made them hilariously stupid. Though having these unrelenting urges and primal instincts is why they can be so dangerous, as they're quite happy to take a machete to the face, or a hammer to the bollocks, if it means they might end up with something to munch on. The more people get bitten and escape, then the more people eventually wind up joining the Idiot Cannibal Club. Hence why almost the entire population of the region has fallen to the virus, with these biters being practically everywhere from all walks of life, even the ones that just want to go camping. In fact, these guys do usually carry quite a lot of loot, so cracking them open isn't really such a bad idea. They're practically zombie piñatas. You'll probably notice that some of the biters wandering around are actually strapped up in armoured military uniforms. Probably good protection against shrapnel, but not exactly great protection against a deadly virus. These less squishy variants do all the same sort of stuff the bog standard biters do, but they're going to be a bit more of an effort to actually take down, soaking up more hits than usual, being protected by all that extra padding. With that said, if they happen to be hanging around a nearby military convoy, then slaying them can often be worth doing, as they'll sometimes be holding on to special keycards which unlock the doors to their armoured vehicles, letting you get your hands on all that fancy gear just waiting to be salvaged inside. Another variant we can't ignore is the guy who's tangled up in electrical wires looking like he's had a fight at the back of his TV. These electrical zombies are going to do exactly what you'd expect them to do, blast out a bunch of sparks and bolts and let everyone nearby ride the lightning. This is usually triggered by them getting hit by something, or by them doing some dumb zombie thing like tripping over a pebble. And the electricity emitted by the power box wrapped around the poor guy's chest is going to start zapping everything around, essentially turning him into a zombie-fied hazard. Probably best keeping that in mind before you start battering him senseless. And then of course, we've got the Degenerate, aka the Ozempic variant. Super skinny veterans who have been living out their zombie lives for quite a long time. They've almost ran out of energy and people's body parts to snack on, as they've slowly rotted away and basically degraded into something that can only be described as a living, breathing corpse. These degenerates have been well weathered over time. Most of their clothes have been ripped and fallen off as they've gotten up to all the typical stuff biters get up to, though they do struggle to keep up with the other infected these days, being a lot weaker and less resilient. They'll still have a go at trying to turn you into a Happy Meal, but they're definitely not going to be as enthusiastic about it, and for that reason, they shouldn't really give you too many problems. Just smack them over the head, and they'll go down faster than a pint of Guinness at a stag do. If you've ever played a Dying Light game before, then you'll know how crazy things can get if you throw gas tanks into the mix. The good old Hazmat variants are back to let us cause a bit more comical carnage, with these guys initially being part of the cleanup crew, who will ironically end up causing more mess than anything else. Just give that tank a good smack and it's going to start leaking out fumes, not long after causing the zombie to explode into a shower of blood and embarrassment. Which won't be very good for you if you're caught within the blast radius, but it also won't be very good for any of the other infected hanging around nearby either. This means you can use these gas tank variants to your advantage in some situations, especially when taking them out from afar with some well-placed shots over distance. But do keep in mind that the explosion will probably attract some unwanted attention, so it might be best getting away from the area before you get swamped by a load of curious zombies. Being one of the yellow hazmat dudes probably isn't very fun, but it could be worse. You could be one of the red ones. This guy's got a much crappier thing strapped onto his back, with this tank being very unstable and very flammable. And once that takes a bit of damage, it's going to start pissing out fire everywhere and turn the place into a raging inferno. This extra spicy variant can cause even more chaos, as he just casually drowns in flames before blowing up anyway. Really sucks to be that guy. But the Hazmat variants don't stop there. because we've also got to contend with a bit of an awkward bugger in a green suit that likes to spit out volleys of corrosive acid over distance. These pesky dudes are introduced post-launch in Dying Light 2, and you're not getting away from them here either. With that said, they are extremely rare, at least at launch anyway, so unless Techland decide to patch more of these guys into the game, then they're not really going to be bothering you all that much. So in the very early stages of infection, before a biter becomes a biter, a human will contract the virus and start displaying symptoms of intense paranoia, confusion and rage, which isn't exactly a great combination for them to have if you happen to be within close proximity of one. If you've ever seen any of the movies in the 28 Days Later franchise, then yeah, you've kind of got the gist. Because the virus is so fresh in their system, they still retain all of their physical strength and a small amount of their own subconscious. And all of that crazed, sensitive, furious energy triggered by the virus lets them do things that they wouldn't be able to do before. They will literally rush across the town and dive over about 7 rooftops just to beat the shit out of you for making a bit of noise. They're the zombie equivalent of a guy who's drank 10 cans of Monster and wants to pick fights with random people on Reddit. Virals are a lot less grabby and bitey and a lot more shouty and slappy, charging over with their arms swinging around, grouping up together to make their target's life a living hell. Oh yeah, and they also come in similar variants as the biters too, just to add a few extra flavours into the mix. If the virals are getting a bit too slappy for your liking though, do remember that shining that trusty UV torch in the face is a pretty good way to disrupt their advances, and give yourself a bit of breathing room. Okay, let's all laugh at the zombie with the big right arm, who just so happens to be called the Goon. Well, before internet slang cursed this guy's name forever, the Goon was another zombie type from the original Outbreak, though its biology has definitely changed a hell of a lot since the first time we saw it back in Haran. These are one of the big guys in the zombie ecosystem, boasting a lot more physical strength and power compared to most of the other infected types. When it comes to chasing you down though, they're not exactly Lamborghinis, generally being slow, lumbering creatures that are very easy to see and very easy to run away from. Though the fact that they're clutching onto massive makeshift hammers made from blocks of ripped up concrete, yeah, that probably doesn't really help them either. This said hammer is obviously going to be the main thing you'll need to watch out for, with the big beastie lad swinging it around and smashing it into anything unfortunate enough to be close by. The Goon doesn't really give a rat's ass about his zombie buddies either, and it's usually a pretty good tactic to persuade him to knock them down too, by luring him into an attack as they're all shuffling around within the hammer's range, completely oblivious to the huge chunk of rock that's about to come crashing into the side of their empty skulls. Expect the Goon's attacks to be punishing, and expect these guys to soak up quite a lot of damage too. Sunsets are normally associated with beauty and tranquility, but not in this world. Nobody's stopping to take pictures for Instagram here, as they're all scrambling towards the nearest safe house, as the game's most notorious monster is starting to sharpen its claws, ready for a bloody night out on the town. Dying Light probably wouldn't be called Dying Light if it wasn't for the Volatile, the apex predator of all the zombies which, despite being extremely powerful and aggressive, is also super sensitive to sunlight. Volatiles come out in their droves during the night time, hunting down all the people who forgot to wear a watch. It's all well and good sneaking around in the shadows trying to get a bit of extra XP, but if one manages to spot you, and the nearest safe zone is about 5 blocks away, then you're gonna have a bit of a bad time, as all the volatiles in the area will click into overdrive and relentlessly chase you down like you owe them all a big sack full of money. And if these frantic bastards don't get you, then gravity probably will. Good luck trying to parkour your ass around in the pitch black bloody darkness. When the volatiles aren't on the prowl though, they'll be chilling out in their nests and sheltering away into the dark shadowy places, recharging their batteries, waiting around for the next sunset. Some of them being wrapped up in biomass cocoons, often surrounded by other volatiles guarding the hive. Generally speaking though, taking an active volatile on in a fight is usually a bit of a dumb idea. These things are designed to be avoided most of the time, though using ultraviolet lights will usually help to slow them down, giving you a brief window to slip away, reach a safe zone, and slink into your nice cozy sleeping bag, while all of those UV lights outside do a decent job at preventing all the monsters from ripping your friggin' head off while you sleep. Sweet dreams. Yep, those wild zombie ladies from Dying Light 2 are back, and they're just as mad as ever. The Banshee is basically a small hag-like infected type with a very feral personality. You can only imagine what these girls were like before they got infected. More red flags than a Chinese festival. Just because this zombie's a bit of a half pint doesn't make it any less dangerous though, as unlike most of the other types of infected, the Banshee is armed with a massive pair of dagger-like talons for slicing up its prey. Giving a crazy zombie something sharp is always going to be bad news for anyone trying to take it on, and what this thing lacks in size and strength, it certainly makes up for in speed and agility, having a totally different combat style to pretty much everything else. Banshees are smart enough to know that getting slapped in the face by an axe isn't very fun, and with them being so small and puny, it's wise of them to be a bit more cautious. They'll typically climb up to reach higher vantage points and pounce over distance using hit and run tactics, even using other nearby biters to their advantage by using them to surf on, allowing them to keep switching positions, thus making them even more of a pest to try and keep tabs on. And if you manage to get yourself into a hard to reach area, then expect them to fire out some weird smoky blobs over distance too. Banshees might be good at kamikazing themselves, but they're not exactly very good at using the elements of surprise, mainly down to the fact that they can't keep the bloody gobs shut, typically heard wailing their heads off as they jump around the place like crack monkeys. Speaking of things that like to be annoyingly cautious, the Spitter is probably one of the most simplistic zombie types in the whole game, being one that pretty much just stands around in one place, launching vomit blobs over distance. It's pretty clear from the get-go that these guys aren't having a very good time, with them constantly regurgitating streams of acidic bile, which can be seen burning its way through the zombie's chest, being infected medics who have had a bit of a nasty reaction to the chemicals they once used to heal themselves, which in hindsight probably wasn't a brilliant idea. Don't feel too sorry for them though, as this has practically turned them into zombified artillery cannons, and although they're not going to do anything particularly devious, they'll still do a pretty good job at winding you up anyway, launching projectiles and mortar-styled aerial bombs from the safety of somewhere annoyingly out of reach, generally being there to disrupt your combat flow and aid their infected buddies over range. Thankfully though, Spitters are just about as feeble as they look, so it shouldn't take too much effort to put them out of their misery, whether that be by hacking away at them up close, or by fighting fire with fire and using their own snidey tactics against them. Remember those annoying buggers from Dying Light 2 that screamed in your face and sent all the nearby infected into a bit of a frenzy? Well, they can also be found in Castor Woods too, albeit with a bit of a spooky makeover. The Howlers here are zombified psychiatric patients that have escaped from the local mental asylum, because every scenic town in the mountains has simply got to have one of those. Because of this, they're still wrapped up tight in their snuggly straitjackets. But that isn't exactly a huge problem for these things, with practically all of their attacks coming from that messed up face. There's no denying that the Howlers are now one of the creepier forms of infected in the game, being zombies which slink around in the shadows, eyes glowing like a sinister Halloween decoration, while they eerily stand around wheezing their lungs out like they smoke 2 packs a day. Doesn't make them any less creepier the fact that they typically like to shy away in dimly lit areas, usually found patrolling the region's many dark zones, surrounded by gangs of sleeping infected, all of which will become a lot more zesty if the Howler starts screaming its bloody head off. The sound waves emitted by the zombie are so intense that they'll blur your vision and deal continuous damage, which is the last thing you really need when you're being swamped by a load of angry biters and virals. Generally best to either sneak around the Howlers, dealing with them in a stealthy manner while they've got their backs turned, or by lamping them over the noggin before they get a chance to screech at you like an overly dramatic Karen. Snitches get stitches. The classic exploding zombies return in Dying Light the Beast, being the true masters of making a bloody mess. Their bloated bodies are swollen with corpse fluid and unstable gases, as a load of pulsating growths have formed under their gooey skin. Lovely. They're not exactly a pleasant sight, let's be honest, but their appearance isn't the only reason why you wouldn't want to let these guys come over to give you a big zombie hug. There's losing the name with this guy, and if you let it get too close, then prepare to wear its guts. Fortunately for you, the mobbers don't blow up instantly in this game, giving you a brief moment to avoid the explosions by jumping out of the way, or by yeeting them backwards with a well-timed dropkick to the belly, which can sometimes go in your favour and even take down other infected that are hanging around nearby. Interestingly, some of the biters dotted around can actually be seen with the same nasty boils starting to form under their skin. So if these poor dudes are in the early stages of developing into a bomber, then I guess they've got some pretty rough times ahead. If you've got more balls than common sense, and you're not too fazed by all the volatiles that come out to play during the night time, then venturing outdoors beyond sundown can yield its own surprises and rewards. Quite a lot of people will probably run through the entire game without even seeing the next zombie in the list, with bolters being extremely elusive creatures that are almost as rare as rocking horse shite. That's mainly because they only come out at night, the time of the day that most people will want to avoid, for very good reason. It's not exactly easy hunting down a creature in pitch black darkness while you're being hunted yourself, with that survivor sense pinging away like a friggin' radar as you sit in a bush, crapping your pants, wondering how long it's going to take before all the red skeletons piss off. But bolters can typically be found on their own, munching away on some poor guy's innards, and if you manage to sneak up on one, then you'll be able to grab some slightly rarer than average loot on its down corpse. Probably not exactly worth the effort, but still maybe worth trying if you enjoy a bit of a challenge. Unlike the chargers in the last game that were essentially just funky glowing rock zombies, the ones over here in Castor Woods take the form of armoured police padded out in heavy duty gear, Only these ones run around like annoying kids in the shopping mall trying to do their best Triceratops impression. They're full of pent up energy and rage and just love taking it all out on the nearest non-infected human, and instead of using their hands like a typical viral, they'd much rather use their entire bodies instead. Probably not the most practical thing to do, but since when have zombies ever done anything practical? This means that there's going to be a lot of dodging involved whenever you need to take one on. Now because they've got a huge squishy ball of meat just casually hanging out from the back, well, this makes for a pretty good thing to target whenever they've ran themselves out of energy, or whenever they've ran face first into the nearest brick wall like they're trying to get to bloody Hogwarts. Because of that rampant nature, they also end up smashing into everything else that gets in their way too. So kinda like that big dude in the mosh pit that always takes things a bit too far, the charger will probably end up knocking down all the other zombies in its path, which you can actually use to your advantage, helping to whittle down the horde and make fights a little bit easier to control. Okay, so the goons might think they're the tough guys, but the real tough guy is actually the Demolisher, which is basically the zombie equivalent to a tank. These guys have mutated into huge bulky abominations, having more muscle than a whole Expendables movie, and it's pretty obvious that they're going to be using a lot more brawn rather than brains when it comes to taking you on. We can see that a lot of these guys were once riot police officers, even though their bodies have pretty much ripped their way out of their uniforms, which is kind of a nice throwback to the first Dying Light game, with them also being riot police back in Haran too. The way they attack is very typical for these sort of Hulk-like monsters, clumsily charging around the place with those massive arms swinging about, with the same sort of finesse as a bodybuilder trying to swat a blue bottle. But they'll also do other stuff too, like tear big chunks out of the floor and lob that debris at you over range, smash the ground to generate ripples of the dust to come tickling your feet, and do a very similar sort of move to the Chargers, where they rush forwards and attempt to bulldoze everything in their path, also running headfirst into walls and fences like the friggin' idiots they are. It can take quite a lot of smacking and slashing to bring them down, but their attacks are generally quite predictable and easy to sidestep. So despite having a menacing appearance and a pretty hardcore wrestling name, Demolishers are actually just big brawny goofballs that are usually a bigger problem to the other infected in the area as opposed to yourself. Well, so far there hasn't been anything particularly new to the series regarding zombie types, but I guess the biggest addition to the beast is the Chimeras, unique boss-styled variants of the infected which can be encountered throughout the story. The Baron, aka the big bad guy of the game, has been cooking up some experiments in his labs, and basically created a bunch of very dangerous monsters in an underground facility. Kinda sounds familiar. These monsters take the form of special infected types which have been made even more special, generally by giving them more power and their own distinctive appearances, with new characteristics and abilities to try and catch you out. There's quite a few of these Chimeras, and I'm gonna briefly run over the different types right now. The first one you'll literally bump into right near the start of your journey is a pretty big dude in a gas mask called Reaper. This Chimera is actually one of the more unique types, in the sense that it's quite different to all the other infected variants in the game. Not just because of the way it looks, but because of the huge spiky bone jutting its way out of the zombie's right arm, which it uses as a deadly melee weapon for aggressively slicing away at you in close range. Reaper sort of has similarities to the Chargers, being a thing that likes to dash around the place and knock you onto the floor, but the inclusion of that pointy arm gives it attacks that the Chargers can only dream of, along with the fact that it also likes to call upon gangs of biters to try and complicate the fight even further. Our next Chimera gives us a pretty dramatic entrance, and is basically an even stompier version of the Demolisher, that doesn't want to wear its skin. This guy is known as Defect, and despite looking like the sort of dude that's just going to wave his arms around and charge at you over distance like the bog standard variant, it actually prefers to use a lot of other attacks that are generally a bit tricky to avoid. Defect tends to pounce on you over distance and ground pound the crap out of the floor like a hyped up zombie gorilla. And for the most part, you'll need to time your counter attacks right to avoid being squished into a puddle of goop. Once you get to grips with his slam patterns and the way he likes to jump around the place though, it's a fairly simple and straightforward fight. Not all of the Chimeras come in the form of zombified gym buffs, with another one being a really creepy variant of the Banshee, also a zombie that doesn't seem to like wearing its own skin. This one's called Mist, and it just so happens to be surrounded by lots of mist. What a funny coincidence. Well, it turns out that the zombie can actually generate this mist somehow, which massively plays into its ability to perform pounce attacks and ambushes from unseen vantage points. Sort of like taking on a normal Banshee, with tons of health in lower visibility, which is just as tense as it sounds. This means you can expect a lot of dive bombing, guttural screeching, and zombie surfing, but you can also expect Mist to be even more aggressive than usual. All the other biters hobbling around in the fog give you even more things to pay attention to in this fairly hectic fight, which makes getting the better of Mist all the more satisfying to do, arguably being one of the biggest challenges in the game up till this point. Defect isn't the only Chimera that seems to be derived from a Demolisher, as there's also another beefed up one called the Behemoth, wearing even less of its skin, but generally having more similarities to the bog standard variants found elsewhere in the region. The Behemoth is basically an even bigger, tankier version of the Demolisher, sharing quite a lot of its attacks. So if you've got the hang of taking those guys down, then this dude shouldn't seem all that much different. With that said, this Chimera variant does have a lot more power and durability, and respecting that power would probably be a wise thing to do, especially with it also being backed up by gangs of annoying biters, which it summons to the fight. Biters that can fall victim to the Chimera's own attacks as it clumsily charges around. Behemoths also seem to be a bit better at chaining different attacks together, to make fights a bit less predictable, and if there's any burnt out cars lying around, well, don't be too surprised to see one of those go flying past your head. With a name like Toxin, you'd probably expect our next Chimera to spit out poisonous liquid over distance, and guess what? That's exactly what this bloody thing does. If you're too anxious to go out after dark and haven't encountered one of the game's bolters yet, then you'll be able to take on this aggressive Chimera variant, which behaves in a very different way to the normal bolters, that are typically known for running away like pussies. They don't normally come out in the daytime either, but I guess having pretty much all of its attributes ramped up to the max gives Toxin a good enough reason to try and take you on. It's a bit of a slippery bugger, dashing around and jumping along stone pillars, generally doing its best to keep a bit of distance while it forms a bunch of corrosive puddles on the ground, and lobs balls of toxic danger at you over range. None of this is made any easier with the Chimera calling on a bunch of biters to join in the fray, something that they all seem to like doing, forcing you to keep chasing the jumpy bastard down and smacking him whenever you've got a decent opportunity to do so. You might expect the next Chimera to be a bit more gung-ho, but if anything, Matriarch is the complete opposite, being another creepy looking Banshee variant which actually tries to run away from combat. This one much prefers to play hide and seek, screaming its head off to attract virals to the area, with those virals being used to attack you while the Chimera just kicks back and lets her minions do all the hard work for her. Clever girl. The fact that the abandoned warehouse where the fight takes place is really big and really dark also plays into this sneaky attack style quite well, along with the fact that the Matriarch can also fart out smoke screens. You're gonna have to pay close attention to the crying noises it makes, being the main indicator to the zombie's whereabouts, and just keep hunting it down in between battering the many virals that come running into the scene every 5 seconds. The Matriarch will get a bit more aggressive as the fight rages on, but at least you won't have to spend as much time trying to track it down, while it whinges in a dark corner. An invisible Volatile. Yep, our next Chimera is an invisible friggin' Volatile. But before you decide to switch the game off and delete it from your hard drive, it's actually not as bad as it sounds. Wraith is another Chimera that likes to use some sneaky hit and run tactics, and although this thing is generally quite feisty, you don't really need to worry about it relentlessly punching the crap out of you like one of the normal, much more brazen Volatiles. With Survivor Sense being practically useless against this guy, you've got to try and anticipate its movements by listening out for sound and generally using your initiative. Wraith becomes vulnerable after jumping over to conduct one of its ambushes, giving you brief windows to deal damage while you can actually see it. Kinda like dealing with a bloodsucker from one of the Stalker games. Gotta watch out for its spitting corrosive stuff every now and then too, and be prepared for Wraith to get a lot more aggressive the more you chip away at its health, especially towards the end of the fight when it loses that cloaking ability altogether. So the biggest, nastiest beastie of them all is just another dude in a gas mask called Colossus, though taking him down isn't exactly going to be a complete walk in the park, due to his punishing beatdowns, his legions of annoying biters, and his absolute stonker of a health bar that you'll need to slowly chip away at. Colossus basically just acts like another Demolisher, only with this guy being absolutely friggin' massive. He sort of combines the movesets of both the Defect and Behemoth Chimeras, and in a way this kinda makes him a fairly predictable dude. It might take a while to actually hurt him, though thankfully someone seems to have left a bunch of toxic waste boxes lying around, and if we can convince the big guy to burst into them, then that'll cause him to become afflicted by a status effect, temporarily making him more vulnerable to your attacks, thus helping to get this fight over and done with slightly quicker. Okay, so we're delving a little bit more into spoiler territory now, and the rest of the video covers some of the infected that are more specifically linked to the characters and the game's story beats. They're not zombie types per se, but they are probably worth mentioning. I'm also not going to go in too heavy with the plot either, so don't expect tons of storytelling. So you'll encounter a hippie dude who gives you some psychedelic water during a side mission called Don't Look Back in Anger. No, you won't get to fight a zombie version of Liam Gallagher at the end of it, but you will get to fight a familiar face from Dying Light 2, with the Revenant played a small cameo in this game, featuring as this mission's final boss. Kyle has to battle his inner demons, and one of those demons happens to take the form of a Revenant, along with a bunch of furious topless clones of himself. The Revenant hops around the perimeter of the arena, sort of acting like a jumpy spitter, while a bunch of angry Kyles rush over to beat you up with their bare hands. Technically, you could argue whether or not this zombie should even be on the list, because at the end of the day, it's not actually real. Just Kyle lying in a tent, tripping balls in the middle of the woods. But yeah, I might as well just add it here anyway. Something else you'll encounter during a side mission, which also happens to be given by the hippie dude, is a really weird and creepy organism that's unlike anything else we've really seen in the game so far. As you venture deeper into what seems to be a volatile nest on the face of it, it won't be long until you realise something's a bit off. There's a whole collection of zombies just hanging around on the walls wrapped up in flesh, which seem to be alive and part of some infected hive mind system. With Kyle being able to contact other test subjects like himself using telepathy, he uses this ability to try and find a guy called Rick, who's been using his telepathic powers to try and control the infected, which has somehow backfired and led to the poor bastard getting mashed together in some sort of infected gunk, with that now being in control of him, using his telepathy to lure others into the tunnel to join them.
We won't hurt you. Come to us.
Spooky stuff. With the beast being in the title of the game, it'll probably seem like a bit of an oversight to leave this guy out. He's not exactly a zombie type, but he's still an infected dude that you'll have a bit of a scrap with, generally acting like a brawny viral with some wacky jumping abilities. Kinda feels like you're taking on Wolverine without the spiky hands. Because I'm keeping spoilers on the lighter side though, that's all I'm gonna say here. The final boss of the game is of course the guy that Kyle's been trying to get revenge on all along. The Baron's basically the game's main antagonist and the reason why there's a whole bunch of chimeras on the loose. He's a super rich doctor with a private army, a lavish lair, and a punchable face. So the sort of guy that would normally be beefing with James Bond. This is a zombie guide after all, and the reason why he's even in the video is because he's going to do the whole Resident Evil thing where he injects himself with a special serum, derived from Kyle's blood, basically turning him into a souped up version of one of his own monsters, transforming into a big nasty chimera which is much more suited to taking you on. Yep, another one that doesn't want to wear its skin. You'll be pleased to know that this isn't just another big Demolisher styled fight, with the Baron being a lot faster and generally less forgiving, having a bit more in common with the Volatiles. Having said that, he does just resort to smacking you around in close range like a pissed off meat demon. And aside from dodging his lunges and hitting back whenever he stops for a second, there isn't really a hell of a lot more to say here. Okay, well I don't normally throw random Easter eggs into these guides, but because you've managed to watch the video right till the end, I'll treat you to Boba the Beaver. Once again, not technically a zombie type, as it's probably just a biter wearing a bloody costume, but I'm going to throw it in here anyway. Plus it stops all the smart artists from rushing to the comments to say, "You forgot the beaver zombie." So rather than going back to the home tab and letting the YouTube algorithm feed you a load of AI slop, why not check out some more of my videos instead? The playlist on the screen's a pretty good start if you want to see some more zombie stuff, but you'll be able to find loads of other enemy and boss guides on my channel too, so maybe give it a visit and subscribe if you like what you see. Thanks to all my channel members for supporting me, and thank you for watching.